had to justify itself in the light of the evidence. Faith had changed its role. Instead of being about trust in the invisible being, or beings everybody knew were out there, it came to be about whether it made sense to postulate the existence of such an invisible being in the first place. It became ontological faith. Belief in God seemed to go beyond the findings of science and logic, so ontological faith had to be brought in to bridge the gap that had opened up between rationality and belief. In today's intellectual climate, both ontological faith and attitudinal faith exist side by side. But I think it's self-evident that from a rational perspective, ontological faith must take precedence. In order to have faith in God, you must first have faith that God exists. Now it seems pretty clear today, and has been for some time, that belief in the existence of God is not really supported by reason or evidence. This is not the place to rehearse the failure of the allegedly rational arguments for the existence of God. Suffice it to say that the classical arguments have long been found wanting, and the most recent attempts, such as intelligent design and an appeal to the so-called anthropic principle, have failed to gain any traction. No one can point to unequivocal evidence of God at work in the world. In fact, the opposite is the case. A recent study by Gregory Paul showed that amongst the developed countries, the pro-religious democracies consistently endured higher rates of societal dysfunction than the pro-secular ones. He concludes, quote, in general, higher rates of belief in and worship of a creator correlate with higher rates of homicide, juvenile and early adult mortality, sexually transmitted disease, teen pregnancy and abortion. So there's little doubt from the perspective of rationality, belief in God or in any supernatural phenomenon for that matter is not supported by good reasons and is therefore irrational. An argument could be mounted that to continue to believe in God in such circumstances might be construed as intellectual dishonesty, or as an example of what Jean-Paul Sartre called mauvaise foi, bad faith. But I don't intend to mount such an argument here today. In the light of all this, ontological faith was put up against rationality and science as an alternative path to certainty about the nature of the universe. Despite what reason seemed to be telling us and the mounting evidence against it, we could still have faith in the existence of God. Blessed are they who have not seen and yet have believed. Believing in spite of or even against the weight of the evidence was put forward as a virtue. The bright leap of faith, it was argued, trumps the cold light of reason. This is all very well, but unfortunately, once ontological faith is put up as an alternative to reason and evidence, something different from, even alien to, rational thought, it is, by definition, irrational. And if faith in the very existence of God is irrational, then ipso facto, faith in salvation through God, which must be predicated on God's existence, is also irrational. A non-existent God can't do you any favours. The faithful have lost the argument. Faith is irrational. But we can't go home just yet. The argument doesn't end there. The faithful still have a few cards up their sleeves. Whether they turn out to be trumps or not remains to be seen. One of the responses to this dilemma for the faithful goes all the way back to St. Anselm, the man who gave us the notorious ontological proof for the existence of God. God is that which there is no greater, and so on. St. Anselm wrote, Crudo ut intelligam. I believe that I might understand. The notion was that you couldn't really understand the truth of the propositions about God unless you first believed in them. Now, whatever else this may be, it is plainly not rational. However comforting it may be to the faithful, it isn't in fact an example of begging the question, assuming what is to be proved. One of the principles of rationality is to try and avoid bias, to try to keep one's biases out of the equation. But in this case, the faithful are not just avoiding a bias, but deliberately importing one in. Not only is it irrational, it is a deliberate and blatant violation of rationality. It doesn't make faith rational. A related modern move by some of the more sophisticated faithful is based on some remarks about religion by the Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who in his later years proposed, to put it simply, that the meaning of an utterance was not its correspondence to some fact about the world, but its use in a discrete universe of discourse, what he called a, quote, form of life, unquote. Statements are only true or false within the rules of the discourse in question and the form of life within which it has currency. On this theory, it's meaningless to apply the standards of a different form of discourse, say science or even common sense, to the utterances of religion. These statements are perfectly coherent and cogent on their own terms and within their own sphere. This is just the way religious people talk, and there's an end to it. People who try to hold religious discourse to account on rational or scientific grounds are sneered at by these sophisticated faithful as crass and old-fashioned onto-theologists who are obsessed with the now passé God of the philosophers, ignoramuses who don't understand the true nature of religious discourse because they have not been initiated into it. There are two things wrong with this view. First, I'd have no problem if people want to get together and talk quietly amongst themselves about God and salvation and whether the Son is of one substance with the Father or not, as long as they keep their idiosyncratic forms of life to themselves. But they don't. They want to convert the rest of us to the alleged truth of their propositions. They want governments to take notice of their views. They want the laws of the land to reflect their morality. They form Christian democratic political parties and try to gain political power. They want us to be declared a quote-unquote Christian nation. They want religion to be treated as special in the community, with special tax concessions and laws prohibiting defamation of religion. In short, they want to be taken seriously in the broader universe of discourse that constitutes our society. Now, they can't have it both ways. They can't participate in the rational and secular discourse of a modern democracy and at the same time cocoon themselves away from rational scrutiny under the veil of being a separate discourse. If they want to be part of the polity, they have to submit themselves to be judged on the standards of the community. And these are predicated on regard for evidence and logic, in other words, rationality. Secondly, the vast majority of the faithful, I believe, do have faith in the God of the philosophers. The benevolent but punitive God who is up there in heaven is omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent and all the other omns, and who does intervene in our lives if we deserve it. And it is faith in this God that has been shown to be irrational. The untouchable God, the God without qualities, who is beyond the evil clutches of the non-believer, is the luxury preserved of a few ivory tower sophisticates and doesn't reflect how it is for the faithful in general. At this point, many believers throw up their hands and storm off, proclaiming that rationality isn't all it's cracked up to be anyway, and if belief in God contradicts rationality, so much the worse for rationality. They have a very strong faith in God, and that is all that matters. Once rationality is abandoned, there's nothing much a rational person like myself can say to such people, except this. To rely purely on faith is a very dangerous procedure. In the first place, there are no criteria for distinguishing one person's faith from another's, and all faiths become equal, including those of the sinister cult worshipper, the Satanist and the suicide bomber. Nor is the strength of one's faith any safeguard. Studies have shown that the more certain an eyewitness is about their version of what they think they saw,